Okay, we're live. So first of all, we're standing very special days in the Pashat days of the Nisim that are the Pashtas, the Nisim of the Gula Mitzvah Shlema. Did everybody see the Targum Yenissim?
No, which one?
On Lech Lecha. V'hine Ema Chashecha. There's four Lashonis by the Bris Ben Habsarim. There's a Mikrais Kodelis over here.
Sure.
It's worth it to have a look at it.
You have He's right here.
Oh.
The job basis?
Yeah, Parshas Lech Lecha.
One also for Parshas Ba'avois.
Okay. So you have to get it.
Yeah, you give me a Parshas Ba'midbar.
Ba'midbar? She's for Midbar, she's great. You have to start the YouTube.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, I don't know, but
Okay, so the pasuk says that when Avraham Avinu was by the Bris Ben Habsarim, Hashem Shlavoi, and the sun was about to set, Avram, and sleep fell on Avram. In other words, he fell asleep. And here he sees Ema, fear, Chashecha, darkness, Gedela, a great one. They fell as all it falls on him.
Yeah.
So the Targum Yenissim and Zeal touches on these words. Vaha Arba Malkavon. These four lashonos of Ema, Chashecha, Gedela, and Nefeles. It says like this: these are four kingdoms. Kaimen Limishabda Yasbenoi. Avraham Avinu is singing the Bris Ben Habsarim that there are going to be four kingdoms that are going to stand up to be Mishabit, to enslave his children. Aimsa, the word Ema Dahu Bavel, that's in Golas Bavel. Kabbalah Dahu Madai. Kabbalah, I guess, means darkness, but that's Madai. Sagia Gedela, in the lashon of the pasuk Dahu Yavan, that's Greece. Nafla Dahu Paras. Nafla, this is the kingdom of Paras. They are going to fall. V'leisleis kifa, and they're not going to have any standing up after they fall. They're just going to fall. And from there, from this downfall of Bavel, asidin lemesak ama v'Yisrael, the Yidden are going to go up. The Pashtus means they're going to go up to the Gula Mitzvah Shlema. So here we have the Targum Yenissim, mamish the Nisim of the Gula Mitzvah Shlema. We have to thank the Eibster for the Nisim, even though it's very painful. A few tens of Yidden were killed. We're not sure exactly how many of them were Yidden, but the number is close to 20. But still, nevertheless, the 6-day war also a few hundred Yidden were killed, but everybody understands it was a big ness. Lefierach, what was supposed to be, it's a big ness. We only ask from the Eibster there shouldn't be not even one more injury, not even any more damage. But the Nisim are beyond comprehension, and the Mahapecha, anybody who's been following this subject, the subject of the Iranian nuclear plans, you know, it's a fear of decades. It's kind of, how do you put into words the relief? You know, a fear of decades. How do you say whatever you say won't quite capture it? That for decades they're saying we're going to make a bomb, and Israel and America can't stop them, and they're not stopping them, and they say they're going to use the bomb, and everybody believes them that they're going to use the bomb. And over here, there was just an article in the New York Times about how Trump wasn't planning on helping Israel. And that also explains Rubio's very cold, press release at the beginning on Friday morning, where he said, or was Thursday American time, that Israel took a unilateral strike. Not a word about Israel has the right to defend itself. They did a unilateral action, which is very, very cold. And it was strange at the time because within a few short hours, suddenly Trump is standing next to Israel and all excited about what's going on. And the New York Times put out an article today. The what happened was there was a whole back and forth in the government, and they decided that Israel is overdoing how urgent the situation is. According to the American intelligence analysis, there's still a long time before Iran could have a nuclear weapon. So they decided they're not going to get so involved. Then once the attack started and Trump saw how crazy successful it was, I mean, they took out the entire top military command in a second, and they knocked out the operations of a few nuclear sites. Plus, they took out all of the air defenses of Iran. Plus, not one plane was shot down. Plus, they took out so many missiles that initially they couldn't even shoot any missiles down. Trump saw all of these Nissim v'Niflos. He had to get involved. And suddenly, within a few hours, the tone of the American government changed from the pre-planned, Israel took unilateral action to being some. They still have cold feet, and it is what's a bigger nest when the Eibster will show that Israel can take care of Iran on its own, or if the Eibster will show that the Goyim go to war for the Yidden. Whatever is the bigger nest, that's what the Eibster will do. In any event, we Pashat auf danken dem Eibishter für die Nissim, and we'll also see at the end of the Maimon what's the Pshat Haftacha from the Tzaddik. The Rebbe gave us our Haftacha that we're ready in the times of Mashiach, and that we're going to have the Skalos and the coming of Mashiach B'Poel Mamish, and the Yidden don't have to worry in such a time. In such a time, the word is that the Eibishter, Eni Hashem Elokenu b'Meneshis Shana v'Achris Shana, and any Indian of war, the interpretation of war, the Rebbe says, based on the Al Shimoni, is only a sign of the Geula. So what does war have to do with Yidden? It doesn't have to do with Yidden that it brings danger to Yidden. It has to do with Yidden that it's a kiyum of the Al Shimoni, that and the Gemara, I think, that Kshatereya, Malchius, Miskaris, Zubezu, when you see war in the world, and when you see the Yidden and Bnei Yisrael misbalim, and they don't know what to do, it's a sign of the Geula Mitzvah Shlema. That's the Haftacha of the Rebbe to us. So may we see it being Mekuyim, B'Poel Mamish, and we should continue this year in Yerushalayim with Mashiach Tzidkenu. Okay, so
when the war began last week,
right,
it was Parshas Ba'aloisco,
yeah,
and the following pasuk was posted. If he survived Melchama V'Artzcha, pasuk Tes, Perek Bamidbo Yud, right? And this has to do with obviously the Chatzos race, which are going to be used in order to advance. So this pasuk had to do with the attack in Iran, the one from Quran. But it says the interesting thing is that as soon as this is successful, then will come with Yomsem's Haskell. This is the it says we're going to have to do what we have to do, and then it's going to come.
Yeah, and the next day's Chumash also started. No, what's the last one they're going to get to the iron? Where does she start over here?
There's a lot of when the war started last week. A lot of pesukim fell into place right away. You know?
The first capital of Yom Yadayim is also V'im Yisrael and V'im Meish Kum Hashem V'Yafutz V'Yivacha. The Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Eibishter that may your enemies disperse, flee, and also was Yom Yadayim, which is Tev, and the first capital of Yom Yadayim is a capital that describes how all the nations of the world, or many of the nations of the world, speak how they're going to destroy the Yidden. They're going to destroy the Yidden. They shouldn't be a nation anymore. I don't remember the Lashonos of it's Kapitel Pei Gimel, and they say that let's go and conquer Eretz Yisrael. Some persons say let's conquer Yerushalayim, and the Navi says is asking by the Eibishter should make all of their plans to be nothing, and then the whole world will turn to the Eibishter. And you should see the words of the Navi being Mekuyim. Now it's nice to learn Kapitel Pei Gimel with Pirush Hamilas. Aber al Kopanim, let us go to the Maimon now. This is a Maimon which is all about Mesiras Nefesh and explaining to us what's shot of proper Mesiras Nefesh. So we started the Maimon with the pasuk Yehi Hashem Elokenu Imanu K'sher Hayom Aviseinu, and the Frierdiker Rebbe says teaches this being both a request that the Eibishter should be with us and a promise that the Eibishter will be with us. And they asks a request and a promise are two opposites. If you're requesting, it means you're not guaranteed of it. You're not assured that this is what's going to happen. And if it's a promise, then you know for sure that it's going to happen. So how do they both? How can you teach the word in both ways at the same time? And then he continues. The Rebbe asks also, why does it say Imanu? Hashem Elokenu Imanu. It sounds like that the Eibishter is tafel to us, is secondary to us. L'chora, the Eibishter is. I mean, it's a double pasuk. The Eibishter is not a tafel. So what's this Hashem Elokenu Imanu? And he explains it. He explains the pasuk based on the idea that over here we're talking about a situation of Mesiras Nefesh. The Frierdiker Rebbe was at a time of Mesiras Nefesh, and he says even though we're not like Aviseinu, in other words, we don't have Mesiras Nefesh, still he's asking and he's saying that the Eibishter will surely be with us. That was another question in the Maimer. How could the Frierdiker Rebbe say about himself that he's not like Aviseinu because he doesn't have Mesiras Nefesh? This whole sicha that he spoke and the whole situation of the imprisonment and everything he was doing was a situation of Mesiras Nefesh. So he starts explaining it by saying that over here we're talking about the Aveda of Mesiras Nefesh. The Aveda of Mesiras Nefesh is the Aveda of Bittul. And Bittul, you can have different levels in Bittul, but then the Iker Bittul is the Bittul Bittul of an Evet to a king, where the Evet has no Metzias left of his own. In other words, you can have a Bittul where the person is bottled, but there's something left of it. Masha'en Kain, when you have the Bittul Mitzad Lamayla of the Bittul Mitzad the king, so there's nothing left of the person's nature. Now, he says like this, that such a Bittul, sorry, not Mitzad Lamayla, the Bittul has to come dafka from the person. Why does the Bittul have to come dafka from the person? Because if the Bittul comes Mitzad Lamayla, if he was forced into it, so then it's only B'chitzenius. It's only in his behavior and the tzir of his keiches. But his essence is not bottled because it wasn't a process that he himself was transformed. Mesiras Nefesh requires that the person himself bring himself to the ultimate level of bittul. And it's because of this that we say about this bittul Imanu that the Eibishter is only with us. Because in this bittul, the Eibishter can't do it for us. If the Eibishter brought us to this bittul, then it wouldn't be a bittul betachlis. And we're talking over here about a bittul of Mesiras Nefesh, which a bittul of Mesiras Nefesh is a bittul betachlis. For it to be a bittul betachlis, we say Yeshem Kenman. We ask Hashem to please help us in the Aveda, but the main Aveda has to come from us. We are the ones who have to do the Aveda, so that it should be a bittul betachlis. And now the Rebbe is going to continue going up several levels in this idea of bittul betachlis and the bittul of Mesiras Nefesh. So we're continuing from Eis Dalet, page Shin Aleph. When you say im, that one thing is with the other thing. So again, according to the Pashat, the way logic works and the way the language works, when you say that one thing is with the other thing, so you're saying that there's a comparison, there's a similarity between the two things that you're discussing. We just had this in last week's Pashat, that the Eibishter told Moshe Rabbeinu to take Shivim Zkenim, and they should stand before the Eil Moed, in front of the Eil Moed with Moshe Rabbeinu, and the Chazal say on the word of Yisiyatz V'Sham Imach, that Imach means B'daimilach, that they will be similar to you, that there will be a Hashra of Shechina on them. The Hagam Shloshanim made al David Tafel, even though the Lashanim is made out on something that's a Tafel, that's secondary, just like the 70s Kenim were Tafel to Moshe Rabbeinu. Nevertheless, Mikol Mokem Yesh Le'Dimion Le'Ha'ikr, there's a similarity between them. There's another Lashon, there's another word in Lashon Kodesh that's used to say that one thing is secondary to another thing, and that's the Lashon Es. Shemoed al Davar Tafel, which Es contains in it the meaning of something which is Tafel to something else. Like Chazal Darshan, and I tried to look this up, but I couldn't find it on time. But it says in the pasuk when you get to the Sheira Niskol that Es Besare V'lo Yachil Es Besare, you're not allowed to eat the flesh of the Sheira Niskol. So the Gemara Darshans on it, Es HaTafel L'Bsare. That I guess it's coming to be mirabah, something that even things that are tafel to the basar, you're not allowed to have hanoah from it. That's the way I would understand it without really knowing what's going on. So you have two lashonis in Lashon Kodesh. For tafel, the second one is es. Nevertheless, even es is similar to the ikar. Kedosh is now al pasuk of nasu itach, just like the drasha of Chazal on the pasuk when you get to Yisrael when he said that Moshe Rabbeinu should choose many judges to help them judge the Yidden, and like this, they'll carry with Moshe Rabbeinu. And Chazal also say on that pasuk, itach b'daimilach, that they will be similar to you. So why do we have two words in Lashon Kodesh, both dedicated to describing something that's batel? What's the difference between imach, which means it's tafel, and doime, and itach, or es, which means that it's tafel and it's doime? So mavor b'sifrei hadiktuk, that the hatafel amunus b'lashen es tafel yeser me'atafel sheb'lashen im. In tafel, when you say that something is secondary to another thing, how secondary do you mean to say it is? So when you use the lashon imach, you're saying that it's secondary, but it's not so secondary. And when you say the lashon es, you mean to say that it's completely secondary. So, Valpiza, according to this distinction in the two lashonis of tafel, the Rebbe explains, b'lashon es, when you say that es, that something is tafel to something else, it's es to something else. The emphasis over here is that you're saying that it's only tafel. It's not similar to the thing, it's extra to the thing. When you use the lashon im, the main thing you're trying to emphasize is that the two things are similar to each other. Okay, so for the whole akdama of Eis Dalet, what do we have? What do we have? Let's wait for Kaddish. Amen. Amen. Okay, so we have two lashonos to say that something is tafel. One lashon is es, and one lashon is im. Our pasuk used the lashon im, Hashem Elokenu Imanu, and the Rebbe explains that when you use im, when you say that it's tafel with im, you mean to emphasize that they're similar. And everything that's secondary, it's not secondary to something else if there's no similarity. Secondary contains in it a double meaning. First of all, that it's only secondary to the thing. Second of all, no pun intended, that it's secondary. So it has something to do with the first thing. If it had nothing to do with the first thing, it wouldn't be secondary to it. The question is, what's the emphasis over here? Secondary, that it's not the main thing, or secondary, that it's similar to the first thing? It's a second to the first. What's the emphasis? So there it says that with Imanu, the emphasis over here is that there's a similarity. So when we say that the Eibishter should be with us, we're drawing a similarity in the idea of the Eibishter being with us to what the Yidden are doing. We're not trying to say that the Eibishter is kivyachol tafel to the person who had dimin kivyachol shebeneim. We're drawing a similarity, a comparison between the two. What's this comparison? That it's the similarity in the Aved of Mesiras Nefesh with Imanu between the Eibishter and the Yidden is in this in itself of what's the Iker, that you have an Iker and a Tafel. Let's see the beer of there, it's going to become clear. This is, in a way, if you take one thing from the Maimon, you can take just the next few lines. Hopefully we'll be able to take more, but pay attention over here. What's the shleimus of Mesiras Nefesh? We learned in yet last week's shir, and I repeated it in the Hakdama, that the shleimus of Mesiras Nefesh is when it comes from the Aveda of the person. It's the person's Aveda. Why? Because Mesiras Nefesh is pshat an absolute and total bittul, and absolute and total bittul can only be when the person does it, because if it's from above, it only affects him superficially. So on one hand, we say that the Mesiras Nefesh has to be, the bittul has to be completely from the person. And that's why the Eibishter is kivyachol tafel to the person, because the Yid has to do the Aveda on his own. However, the other way around is also true. The shleimus of the Aveda of the person himself. Even this Aveda that the person has to do on his own. Including the Aveda of Mesiras Nefesh, which needs to be betachlis on his own. Including the type of Mesiras Nefesh which is on things that the person isn't obligated to have Mesiras Nefesh. So why is he doing it? He's doing it entirely because of his own Aveda. Right? Nevertheless, he's having this Mesiras Nefesh not because he wants to. He's doing it with his bittul to likus. The kiman should be tuli lakadosh baruch hu bittul betachlis, since his bittul to the Eibishter is a bittul betachlis, an absolute and complete bittul. Lachein kol mitzvah gam k'shal bedina ein mechuyev limser nafshel al zeh. When it comes to every single mitzvah, even a mitzvah for which he's not obligated to have a Mesiras Nefesh, he etzloi by him, he is approached to it, and the way he does it is be'efen shein shaykh klal shlei l'kaima. It's impossible for him not to fulfill this mitzvah. Even when fulfilling the mitzvah requires Mesiras Nefesh. So what do we have over here? We have over here two extremes coming together. On the one hand, we say that the Aveda of Mesiras Nefesh requires what? That should be the Aveda of the person. When it's the Aveda of the person, so then in ordinary circumstances, it depends on what the person wants to do. His ratzon. Does he judge this? Does he determine that this is something very important and you have to have Mesiras Nefesh on it? So then he's going to have Mesiras Nefesh on. If it's something that he determines is not so important, it's a mitzvah that's not so important, and Mesiras Nefesh isn't required, so for that, he won't have Mesiras Nefesh. So you end up in a problem over here. You're saying that we need the person to do it on his own, not because the Eibishter said. We want the person to do it because it's his thing. But you say you want the person to do it because it's his thing, so then he's going to decide, Hashem decides these things yes, these things not. So we say that the Yid also has to have with him that this Mesiras Nefesh itself has to be not mitzvah his own thing. The Mesiras Nefesh has to be because it's impossible to not do what the Eibishter wants. If the Eibishter wants that something should happen, it's not my ratzon, it's not my choice. It's impossible that this thing shouldn't be done. Why? Because the Eibishter wants it. So you have over here a combination of two things. Why is he having Mesiras Nefesh? Because he was poil on himself to have Mesiras Nefesh. But Mitzad Sheni, what's his understanding of Mesiras Nefesh? His understanding of Mesiras Nefesh is not that it's up to me to decide what we're going to have Mesiras Nefesh. His understanding of Mesiras Nefesh is that when the Eibishter wants something should be done, it must be done. There's no two ways about it. It's not up to me to decide. That's the type of Mesiras Nefesh that he has. Okay. When the Yid does his Aveda of Bittul to the Eibishter mitzad elikus, not mitzad his ratzin, so the Mesiras Nefesh also becomes greater. The Kashem Mesiras Nefesh lehem mipnei shu reitzu v'hichlit l'kayim tzivei kadosh baruch hu gam k'shtzarich l'zeh Mesiras Nefesh. When the Mesiras Nefesh is not mitzad Bittul to elikus, the Mesiras Nefesh is merely because he decided that he wants to do what the Eibishter wants him to do, even if it requires Mesiris Nefesh Hayesh Etzle, Nesinas Mokim Shev Shalias Gam Beifenachet. It's possible by him that it should that he shouldn't have Mesiris Nefesh. Amen. 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 So this Yid who decided that whatever the Eibishter wants, you have to do. There's no two ways about it. If he decided to do Mitzat his own Ratzon, so then he's not going to do it. But it's possible by him to not do it. There's in the smoking that this doesn't have to get done. In other words, the Mesiris Nefesh isn't absolute, isn't complete. It's just the B'Poel Mamash, he does it. This that B'Poel Mamash he is having Mesiris Nefesh is not because it must be that way, it's only because that's what he decided. Mashenkin Mesiris Nefesh his bittul to the Eibishter Shalachin Kol Mitzvah Shetziva Kadosh Baruch Hu Yesu Beifin Shein Shayach Klal Shlei L'Kaimo. Amen. Yishmar Baruch Hu Mitzvah Chalei Oz Ein Etzinas Mokin Klal Shiyeh Beifenachet. Amen. 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 So that was saying over here, Edel Avort. What's the pshat Mesiris Nefesh? Mesiris Nefesh is an expression of complete dedication to the Eibishter, right? That I'm completely bottled to the Eibishter. And that points out over here a subtle point. When you have Mesiris Nefesh, because you decided, even if your decision is that no matter what happens, in any circumstance, I'm going to have Mesiris Nefesh, but because it's your decision, I mean, the dedication isn't complete. I mean, because there's a smoking. I mean, nice, but they make nichts, you say? Really? Nicht gewusst. Amen. Amen. If by the person, it's shaykh to not have Mesiris Nefesh. The Poel Mamash, she has Mesiris Nefesh, but it's shaykh to not have Mesiris Nefesh. So his bittul isn't complete. Why is it shaykh for him to not have Mesiris Nefesh? Because his whole Mesiris Nefesh is because he decided to have Mesiris Nefesh. And therefore it's shaykh for him to not have Mesiris Nefesh. Masha'enkin, when his decision to have Mesiris Nefesh is because the Eibishter. By the Eibishter, it's mitzad that the Eibishter said that, so therefore it's impossible. So then it's not even shaykh to not have Mesiris Nefesh. Okay, I'm a little bit not clear over here. Exactly where do you define the Aveda of the Yid V'Koach Atzmai? And where do you define that it's because of the Eibishter? No, there's an episode over here that Mesiris Nefesh has to be mitzad the Aveda of the Yid. Mitzad that it's his ratzon. Because that's the only way that the Mesiris Nefesh will be to his core. Otherwise, it's only external to him, the Mesiris Nefesh, if it's not mitzad his ratzon. But he said, so what does that mean? It means that why am I having Mesiris Nefesh? Because it makes sense to me to have Mesiris Nefesh. Because I thought about it, I made a cheshbon, and I came to the conclusion that I should have Mesiris Nefesh for this thing. If that's the case, so then it depends on what I'm thinking. On what to me feels like something that's worthy to have Mesiris Nefesh for it. Okay, that's pshat that it comes with Tatzis Ratzon. Then he says, no, but this Mesiris Nefesh has to be mitzad that what? That when the Eibishter says that something should happen, it's impossible for me to not do it. If the Eibishter says that this mitzvah should happen, even if it doesn't require, even if it doesn't obligate me to have Mesiris Nefesh, but if the Eibishter said that it should happen, then it's impossible for me to not do it. So, and this is my decision. It's a little confusing. I'm not sure where to put this and where to put that. You understand what's bothering me over here? He's saying the best way I can understand it is that you can have like this. The person says that it makes sense for me to have Mesiris Nefesh. But what's the Taich Mesiris Nefesh? So the Taich Mesiris Nefesh is there are certain things that are very important. And for things that are very important, you have to have Mesiris Nefesh. That's when it's mitzad his cheshbon.
When it comes to the Eibishter.
But if the cheshbon is mitzad, I'm bottled to the Eibishter.
So then it doesn't make a difference what it tells you.
It doesn't make a difference. If the Eibishter said something, it's
Whatever
impossible.
He tells you. whether it's important to you or not.
So what does the person have to do? The person has to be ma'ir by himself, a complete bittul to the Eibishter, to the point where he can't stand it that there's any small thing that the Eibishter wants that doesn't happen. He has to bring himself to that situation. In other words, what he's telling himself the
You
whole
can't
day.
do anything that's not the way the Eibishter wants.
And also about Seitiv. And also if there's something that the Eibishter needs done,
And in Asaytev, he cannot not do
he
it.
can't not do something that the Eibishter wants. So what he's working on himself the whole time is to say, I'm battles from Eibishter, and whatever the Eibishter says, goes. And there's no two ways about it. So he's working on himself to bring himself to that way of thinking, as opposed to working on himself to bring himself to thinking that there are certain things that are very important to Mesiras Nefesh. That's not bittul. Bittul is pshat, that whatever the Eibishter says, okay, jump, he told me jump, how high, that's it. Okay.
I think the ikka word is the achlata.
He's the one who has to make the achlata.
Yeah, it's a resolution. This is what I want to do.
Right.
This one. So even when it comes to the Indian of the Hakadosh Baruch Hu says you have no choice but to do what I say, it also requires a achlata.
Right. But the question, right, and there's points of that. What's the achlata? The achlata is that whatever the Eibishter says goes.
Yeah, but that's got to have. It's
the bittul.
It's a stronger achlata than the one before, where the achlata was only something very, very important.
Correct. It's a bittul betachlis. Correct. No, sorry. Hey. And this is the meaning of Elokenu. In the Aveda of the Avis, we have emphasized both of these points, both extremes. Now the Avis were mekayim the entire Torah before the Eibishter gave it. In other words, before they had to keep it. They were serving the Eibishter. They were fulfilling mitzvahs not because the Eibishter commanded them. So the Aveda of the Avis was because of their own Aveda. Nevertheless, what do we say about the Avis? The Avis were betachlis abitul. The Avis had an amerkava or bitul amerkava l'reichav or bitul betachlis. Nevertheless, the Avis were absolutely batal, like the bitul of the reichav, of the merkava to the reichav. This is pshat over here. Why is the bitul of the merkava a bitul betachlis? The merkava, we're talking about a wagon. Why do we say that the bitul of the merkava is a bitul betachlis? So he says like this.
It can't do anything by itself.
So, but that bittul you have by Eved also.
The one controlling the work is Hashem. He's in the driver's seat.
But a bittul of Eved is also like that. He can't do anything that the Adam doesn't want. He has to listen to it. He knows the Adam is in the driver's seat, also with a whip sometimes. So why do we say that after bittul b'merkava is a bittul b'tachlis?
You don't have no mind. The Merkava has no mind of its own.
Very good. The Merkava has no mind of its own. He's going to say this now. The bittul Merkava l'reichav v'loy mitzad haratzon da Merkava. This that the Merkava is bottled to the reichav. It's not because the wagon decided I'm going to be bottled to the reichav. The wagon understands the greatness of the person. Sometimes the Merkava is described as the horse. That the horse understands the greatness of the rider, and the horse decides that he wants to be bottled to the rider. No, the rider forces the horse. It's not even his choice. It's not even up to him.
He's not really bottled. He has no choice.
It's bittul b'tachlis. It's garnished. It's garnished. There's nothing left of it. So we see over here by the Avis also, the Mitzad Echad, their whole service to the Eibishter was not because the Eibishter told them to. There was no Matan Torah. It was all their own choice. But nevertheless, they brought themselves to serving the Eibishter with a complete bittul, saying that it's not even because of me. There's a thing of Torah. The Taka the Eibishter didn't tell me I must do it, but in the Eibishter's Torah it says this is the way I should behave. The Eibishter didn't tell me I have to do it. But how does the Eibishter want me to behave? In this Torah that he didn't tell me yet I must, he says how one should behave. And if that's what the Eibishter says, then I'll do it with a complete and with a complete bittul. So since when it comes to bittul, there are many dargis. Right, and just in this moment itself, he mentioned a few dargis. There's a bittul that's a superficial bittul, just in the tzir of the keiches. Then there's a bittul that's a bittul b'atzam by the person, and then there's a bittul that's a bittul b'atzam by the person, but mitzad his ratzon. And then there's a bittul that's a bittul by the person, sai mitzad his ratzon, but sai in a complete bittul to what the Eibishter wants. That it's impossible that what the Eibishter wants shouldn't happen. So since there's so many dargas and bittul, Elokenu v'vakshim, Fidik Rebbe says we're asking by the Eibishter, that the Eibishter should be with us just like he was with our fathers, with the Avos. Our bittul, the Imanu, our bittul to likus, should be the type of bittul that was with that the Avos had, which is a bittul dimer kavet. Says what the Fidik Rebbe is saying over here. The Fidik Rebbe is in Russia, and is demanding Mesiras Nefesh beyond, and like we'll soon see in the end of the Maimer, this is a Mesiras Nefesh that it was granted to us as a Yerusha, as an inheritance from the Fidik Rebbe, and then from the Rebbe Pashtas. And what's he saying? To serve the Eibishter, mitzad that the Eibishter is geschmack, mitzad that it's a beautiful thing to live like a Yid, veret. That's maslakavl pras. That's not. It's not. This is not the Aveda. This is it's a good thing, but this is not the Madrega that the Rabbeim require of us. They require of us that we should serve the Eibishter with a bittul. And what kind of a bittul? A bittul of Mesiras Nefesh, a bittul betachlis. And he says this Aveda of the bittul. Wait. You have to do it. I'm asking you to be bittul betachlis, but you can't just say, okay, fine. Do me a favor. Make me bittul. No, you're going to have to work on it. You're going to have to make yourself batal. And even though you're the one making yourself batal, I still want that the bittul should be betachlis, just because the Eibishter says something. The Eibishter wants something, so you go and do it without asking any questions. We're talking about, and the Fidik Rebbe is saying, I want it to be like the Avos. Just like the Avos were betachlis bittul, you should also be. Of course, the Fidik Rebbe is not telling us that we're nowhere near like the Alter Rebbe says. No, that's when we get to Moshe. But either way, in Tanya, that we can't even begin to touch the Madrega of the Avos. But that type of Avodah, that's what we have to do the same way they did it. And when you look at the Rebbe's Chassidim and you compare it to other people who are working in the field of spreading Yiddishkeit, Baruch Hashem, the world is full of organizations that work to strengthen Yiddishkeit in so many ways. But the whole world is talking about the Shluchim. And it's not only the shluchim. The shluchim is what everybody gets to see, but it's really every chassid. When a chassid says that I have to serve the Eibishter, he does it just like a shliach does it. What's his pshat? With a Mesiras Nefesh. By a shliach, there's no such thing. I'm going to go. Let me see if somebody's. I don't know if he meant it literally, but I was talking to a friend at an out-of-town chasna, and he has a sister who married, or his friend has a sister who married a Litvishe person, and they were thinking of going to do main shlichus. But they gave in a list of requirements to the organization that was going to send them. Basic kosher food they have to have. He said that there has to be sushi. I don't know if it was true. I think that's an exaggeration. But there was requirements before we go. The person decided he made a good decision. He said, I'm going to strengthen Yiddishkeit. I'm not working to make a business, to make money, my own covet. I'm going to strengthen Yiddishkeit. But there's conditions before I go, that a shliach should go. No preconditions, and he goes there a one-way ticket. And he has nothing. Yes, there's many shluchim, Baruch Hashem succeed, and all the shluchim should build multi-million-dollar centers and should be the chief rabbi of their cities. The Shahavat Tzlach L'Maylam and Hamashur. But the Peil Mamash is many shluchim, and probably the Rebbe of the shluchim who don't have this. They don't have it. My father told me that the Rebbetzin was very spoke with a lot of I'm not sure exactly the word, but basically she spoke with a lot of hispilus about the shluchim. The Rebbetzin told my father something along these words. I can't remember it now. I didn't. If I would remember, I would ask him so I could quote it better. But she said something like a young couple goes out. They haben nicht kosher essen und chinuch and chaverim. They don't have any of this, and the Rebbetzin is supposed to be spileless about how shluchim go. Now, who's saying this? The Rebbetzin. The Rebbetzin was no stranger to Mesiras Nefesh. The Rebbetzin in this whole story, who was when the Fidik Rebbe said the Yehi, Hashem Elokenu Imanu, the Rebbetzin was with the Fidik Rebbe going on the train to customer. The Rebbetzin knew what's Mesiras Nefesh. When she saw the Mesiras Nefesh of the shluchim, she identified over here, she recognized over here that there's something over here tremendous. And this is, I'm trying to take it out of the ACS, to bring it from the ACS of the Maimon to more Pashta ACS. This attitude, this approach, that the Rebbe inculcated within the Hasidim is an approach of absolute and total Mesiris Nefesh. Why? Because that's what the Eibishter wants. This is the Mesiris Nefesh that the Rebbe is talking about in this Maimer. And according to this whole explanation, we can understand why the Frierdiker Rebbe was able to say about himself that we are not similar to our fathers, to the Avis, and he included himself in this statement. What's true Mesiris Nefesh? That when Mesiris Nefesh is mitzad is bittul. And since, like we explained earlier in the Maimer, there are many madregas and bittul. It's shaykh that the Frierdiker Rebbe should say by him that his bittul is not quiet to the level of bittul that's needed. In other words, earlier in the Maimer we said that the Frierdiker Rebbe should have a nivis and say that he's not having Mesiris Nefesh. That doesn't make any sense. It's impossible to say that he was having Mesiris Nefesh. Narvas over here, the Frierdiker Rebbe is talking about the bittul of Imanu. What's the bittul of Imanu? The bittul of Imanu is when the person is completely tafel and bottled to the Eibishter, a complete and absolute bittul. His Aveda comes mitzad himself, but the Rebbe said that the Imanu also means that he's similar. And in other words, he's similar in the sense that he's also into the Eibishter, that the Eibishter is the Iker and he's the tafel. That his whole Mesiris Nefesh, his whole bittul, is because the Eibishter said that something must happen. It doesn't matter if I think it's important, big or small. If the Eibishter said, then it's got to go. And in this level of bittul, the Frierdiker Rebbe Mitzad Nivus was able to include himself in this category to say that perhaps something is missing over here, the Frierdiker Rebbe could say Mitzad Nivus, and how absolute his bittul is to the Eibishter. According to this, we could also explain, and this part of the Maimer, by the way, I believe that I can't understand it, but let's see. This, that the Frierdiker Rebbe says in the Sikha that he's including himself. Yehi lashon avtacha vetzayin mituns. He's saying, "Sai, it's a request to the Eibishter, and Sai that the Eibishter, and Sai a guarantee that the Eibishter will be with us." When is a tefillah of a tzaddik and a promise of a tzaddik two different things? Hu ki tefillah hi bakashas ha'adam. And even when it comes to tzaddikim, even if the person is a tzaddik, but he has a mitzvah bedakus, so in that case, tefillah v'avtachim shnei inyanim. When he davens, maybe the Eibishter will do it. When he can make avtacha, why? Because the Eibishter told him he can make avtacha, so then he can make avtacha. But when it's his thing, it's only in the eifin of a tefillah. In other words, the only one who could give an absolute guarantee is the Eibishter. A tzaddik can't give a guarantee. How could a tzaddik is a person? How could he give a guarantee? The Eibishter is the only one who decides things. There is a certain type of a tzaddik, though, who's batal betachlis. He has no metzias left to himself whatsoever. Every word that he utters is the Eibishter's words. Al derech shchina medaberes v'tech gereinei. Or al derech what Aaron told the Malach HaMavis when I forgot when it was, but when the Malach HaMavis was out in between the Yidden and he was killing them, it was a Magefa. Somebody remembers which story it was, could help me out. And Aaron HaKain went out with the Keteiris. Moshe Rabbeinu told Aaron to take the Keteiris and go stop the Malach HaMavis. So Aaron HaKain held the Malach HaMavis by his hand. By Ma'aseh Pinchas Shkech. So Malach HaMavis, Aaron HaKain held the Malach HaMavis by his hand with the Keteiris. He went out with the Keteiris. He held the Malach HaMavis by his hand, and he told him stop. So the Malach HaMavis told him, why should I stop? I said, Moshe Rabbeinu told me to tell you to stop. This is all in Rashi. So the Malach HaMavis tells him, I'm going b'shlichus of the Eibishter. They told me to kill the Yid, and then you're coming to shlichus of Moshe Rabbeinu, a Rav and a Talmud. To who do you listen to? You listen to the Rav, not to the Talmud. So Aaron answered him, says Rashi, Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't say anything on his own. If you don't believe me, come, let's go to the Eilmayit, to the Mishkan. Over there is Moshe Rabbeinu and the Eibishter is there. You can ask him yourself. So there's a certain type of a tzaddik that doesn't say anything of his own. This is a tzaddik who has none of his own agenda. And such a tzaddik has a bittul betachlis. There's no metzias left. And therefore, if the words come out of his mouth, that something should be like this, it means that these are the Eibishter's words, and therefore it's Avtacha. When is my words my words? When I have my own agenda, when I have my own yeshus, when I have my own netzias. So by a regular person, everything that he says is about what's in it for him. When it's a tzaddik, it already starts getting more bedakas. It's about a likus, but it's his agenda within a likus. Even a tzaddik in the most dakastic even has a meaning of mitzias, and therefore he can only make a bakasha. He asks the Eibishter. But then you have a tzaddik who's completely bottled betachlis. When you're talking about such a tzaddik, what's the pshat, like what Aaron said about Moshe Rabbeinu? He doesn't say anything of his own. Every word that comes out of his mouth is what the Eibishter wants. His whole mitzias turned into something that just does what the Eibishter wants. Such a type of a tzaddik can give a havtacha, because it's coming from the Eibishter. What the words that come into his mouth is Shechina Medaberes K'Techkein. It's the Eibishter's words, and therefore the havtacha is a tzaddik v'shlichusa shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Havtacha can only be by a standard tzaddik, only when the Eibishter tells him go and make a promise. Utfilas a tzaddik, however, he bakashas a tzaddik atzmai. When the tzaddik himself has a request, he can only say it in the way of a tefillah. But when we're talking about Mashenkin, even his own Aveda, like we said earlier in the Maimer, it has to be Imanu, the first shot in Imanu, that the Yid has to do the Aveda mitzad Atzmai, mitzad his Ratzah. Nevertheless, he also does it in Imanu, b'deimelach, the other pirish in Imanu, that he's a completely tafel to what the Eibishter wants, he's completely bottled to what the Eibishter wants, it's only what the Eibishter wants. And therefore, he betachlis abitul, that it's whatever the Eibishter wants, it's impossible should be different, and that permeates his entire existence until every word that he utters. So then, even when he says it as a tefillah, as a bakasha, it's also a havtacha, because this that the tzaddik ba'avedas atzmai came to the conclusion to ask a certain bakasha. But we're talking over about a tzaddik who's completely bottled to the Eibishter. If these thoughts fell into his head, then it must be that this is what the Eibishter wants, and therefore it's also Havtacha, because it's not the Tzaddik's agenda, it's the Eibishter's agenda, and therefore it's also Havtacha. So I can't remember who I heard of. There was somebody who was saying something about what the Rebbe said. There's the famous story with Sharon when he was here as, I think, either still in the military or the Minister of Defense. And the Rebbe told him, don't go on a flight. He was scheduled to go on a certain flight back to Israel. And the Rebbe told him, don't go. The Rebbe didn't give him a reason. And he didn't go, and that plane crashed. I think everybody was killed.
Crash or was
a terrorist attack?
Yeah, it was hijack.
It was hijacked, or there was a terrorist attack in the airport when it was going. Something, people were killed. And I think Sharon himself asked the Rebbe later, why didn't you tell me? Then I would tell the other people. I'll tell them why. So the Rebbe said, you think I know why I said? I didn't know why I said it. But that's one story. But I think something
with the Friedrich also with the doctor.
Chicago.
Says that it comes to me. Is that the son wanted to go to Israel? Yeah.
And he pushed the father pushed the son to come to the Friedrich. The Friedrich told him he shouldn't go. He went and he perished. So the father came back to the Friedrich. Why didn't you tell me what's going to happen?
They just came down at that moment.
And I think at that occasion, Friedrich said that I didn't know why. This is what came to my head. But things that are said in this room should be listened to. I think Friedrich added that when I say something in this room, you should follow it. So, but I think it's Telushkin or somebody who he says like either the story with Sharon or the story with the Friedrich Rebbe or a story with himself. He said, the way he says it, okay, I'm not Hasidim, but Telushkin he's a big chassid of the Rebbe, but he talks more in a seichelic way. So he says, I got an insight into how Ruach HaKodesh works. He'll give him insight into how, but the Nakudav here is that the tzaddik says it. It's not his own words. The tzaddik is doing his own aveda. He's thinking what should be, what should not be. And somehow he comes to a certain conclusion. That conclusion, since he has no metzius, that conclusion is the Eibishter's conclusion. If it was his agenda, then the conclusion would have been his own conclusion. The conclusion is the Eibishter's conclusion because there is no metzius of his. And therefore something just falls in his head that it should be what the Eibishter wants. And therefore the Friedrich Rebbe was able to also include Ahavtacha. He made a bakasha, but he says it's also Ahavtacha. Because if the Fidik Rebbe has in his head that you should make a bakasha, it ends up being, it means that's what the Eibishter wants, and therefore it's Ahavtacha. The part that I don't understand about this part of the Maimer is that, is the Rebbe saying that the Fidik Rebbe was aware of it? You can't say that the Rebbe was saying that the Fidik Rebbe was aware of it. Because if he was aware of it, that he's bottled betachlis, and therefore his bakasha is also Ahavtacha, then he couldn't say Mirzain and Nikolai. What's the Rebbe's answer that the Fidik Rebbe was able to include himself to say that our Mesiris Nefesh, and the Fidik Rebbe including himself saying my Mesiris Nefesh isn't similar to the Mesiris Nefesh of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that the Fidik Rebbe is saying that he doesn't believe that his Mesiris Nefesh is bittul betachlis. It's an absolute Mesiris Nefesh, and that's why he could say Mirzain. But if that's what the Fidik Rebbe is saying, then how could the Fidik Rebbe give a Havtacha? A Havtacha, a promise, can only be given by somebody who knows that he's bittul betachlis. So, what's going on over here? Is it for me to? I'm not trying to understand what was the Fidik Rebbe thinking. That's not a road that ought to be taken, and we don't take it. I'm trying to understand the Maimon, and it seems to be a contradiction over here. That from the beginning of this, it sounds like the Rebbe is saying that the Fidik Rebbe didn't think of himself as being batal b'tachlis, had doubt about it at least, and from the end.
But no, Andy's saying that even the tzaddik, even the Zaveda, which is B'kerech Atzmai, was also in.
No, but why? Because
was also B'tachas HaBittul.
Because it's not a Metzias. That's the whole part of the Maimon. That even the Zaveda B'kerech Atzmai
that's why
is B'tachas HaBittul.
He's saying that everything really was.
Yeah, that's the word of the Maimon. Yes. That's the word of the Maimon. Even the Zaveda B'kerech Atzmai. Because the Fidik Rebbe said about Kasha and a Havtacha, which the Rebbe says can only be given by somebody who's batal betachlis. To say that my Bakasha is also a Havtacha can only be given by somebody who's batal betachlis. So how could the Fidik Rebbe do it if he has doubt? If he says Mirzain and Nitklai? So which one is it? Unless you're going to say that the words just came to him because the Eivishter put it in his mouth. But in the Havana of the Maimer, like I said, is the only thing that's our business because they ever put it in the Maimer. So it's a question. You're allowed to stay with a question. It's not the end of the world. So to summarize, l'chura, the word of the Maimer over here is it's good that you brought it up though. That traditionally we say that there are two distinctions. There's Aveda b'keach atzmai, and then when it's Aveda b'keach atzmai, when it's my Aveda, so then it's based on what I think, and it's based on where I'm holding. And things that are important to me, those are the things that I'm going to do my Aveda. Those are the things I'm going to put effort into or have Mesiris Nefesh for. Things that maybe say in the Sefer somewhere, or maybe somebody will tell me about it. If it doesn't come out to me that it's an important thing, that never mind, I should have Mesiris Nefesh for it, I won't have it. That's one type of Aveda. What's the mila of this Aveda? That it's the person's Aveda. Then you have a different type of Aveda. You have an Aveda which is not because of me, because the Eivishter said. In this type of Aveda, there's no picking and choosing over here. Whatever the Eivishter said, that's what gets done. There's no two ways about it. What's the chesed? That it's not the person's Aveda. And this Maimer over here, the Rebbe is saying over here, tremendous word. The Rebbe is saying over here that the person's Aveda b'keach atzmai could also be b'tachlis habittul. Why? Because what's the teichen of his Aveda b'keach atzmai? That he has to bring himself to this hanocha, that when the Eivishter wants something, he efshar b'ifenach. When the Eivishter wants something, it's impossible that it shouldn't happen. And that's what he's working towards. And when he reaches that place, even if it's just in a little bit, but that's his attitude. It's a way of thinking. It's a whole way of thinking. Why am I doing Torah mitzvahs? It's like in Kunst and Yanshal Torah Chassidus, the Rebbe asks, the Rebbe points out over here, are you allowed to steal? No. Are you ever allowed to steal? No. It's the worst. Stealing the worst thing yet. Are you allowed to kill? This is not clear. I'm not sure this is calling consensual. This is trying to explain what it says over there. Are you allowed to kill? No. Is it like more you're not allowed to kill than you're allowed to steal? Like, is that like a more you're never allowed to kill? Yeah. I thought you just told me you're never allowed to steal. What just happened over here? When you said never, what did you mean? And the answer is very simple. When you say you're not allowed to steal, what you're saying is not that you're not allowed to steal, not that there's not a nesinus smoking for stealing. Saying that there isn't a nesinus smoking for stealing, but since I'm a person who learned Shulchan Aruch and was raised as a Yid and grew up, and even Chassidim Mitzayla, it says that B'Peil Mamish, My conclusion is that you're never allowed to steal. And the sinas makim is there. It's just that because I'm a good person, so I say you're never allowed to steal. When it comes to killing, there's even less of an sinas makim. It was never mushlo betachlis. It was never like you're not happening. It was never a never. Why was it never a never? Because it was always shaykh to do. It was my decision that said you're never allowed to do it. When it comes to killing, my decision is an even stronger decision that I'm not going to kill. In other words, it's even less of an sinas makim, and that's why the average person will answer that question that way. That you're allowed to steal, you're never allowed to steal. Ever, under any certain, never. Then you say, are you allowed to kill? Never also. Which one is more? He'll say, no, the other one is more. Because it's his decision. There's an sinas makim always. Masha'enkin, when you say, what, now this is all because, why you're not allowed to steal? Because it's not a good thing. Why you're not allowed to kill? Also because it's not a good thing. Which one is more of a not good thing? Killing. And that's why by the person, when you say, are you not allowed to kill? Never is more of a never than you're not allowed to steal, because killing is a worse thing than stealing. And that's why the never is a bigger never. What's the whole problem over here, though? Why are we twisted up over here? Because the whole thing was based on the person's cheshbonis, on what he thinks. And that's why now you have all of these distinctions. Masha'enkin, when the person starts from the other side, the person says you're not allowed to steal. Why are you not allowed to steal? Not because it's a bad thing, but because the Eibishter said you're not allowed to steal. They were saying, you're not allowed to steal. Why are you not allowed to kill? Not because it's a bad thing, but because the Eibishter said you're not allowed to kill. Now, if that's where the person brought himself to, that his whole hanach is what the Eibishter said, not what I think. There's no sinas makim not for stealing. There's no sinas makim not for killing, and they're all in the same way. They're all with the same no. Because why? It's not because I think it's a bad thing. It's because the Eibishter said. That's the Nekud in Kunstnermishal Teisach Chassidus that it has from inside the essence said that the Eibishter said you're not allowed to. So it's the same thing over here. L'chura. This is the part over here. What he's saying, that the Aveda has to be mitzad the person b'keach atzmi. He has to do the Aveda. But what's the teichen of his Aveda? Why are you not allowed to do this, that, or the other? And why do you must do this, that, or the other? Not because this is good, and that's why I must do this. And this is bad, and that's why I must not do this. That's like the first one with the person who's stealing and killing. There's a difference between the never. You have to be like the second person who's stealing and killing is because the Eibishter said you're not allowed to. And if the Eibishter said you're not allowed to, then stealing and killing is the same never. The same Eibishter who said you're not allowed to kill, said you're not allowed to steal. It's the same exact amount upgefrekt. There's no sinas makim. And that's what Rebbe is saying in this manner, that that's how the Aveda has to be. That the person has to do the Aveda on his own. The Eibishter isn't forcing him to follow Torah and mitzvahs. The Eibishter isn't forcing him to do it. He's working on himself to make himself completely bottled. The Eibishter, I will perform Torah and mitzvahs and learn Torah because the Eibishter said. But what's his Havana over here? What's the teichen of the Torah and mitzvahs? Not that because Torah tells us what's good and what's bad. Not because mitzvahs tell us what's good and what's bad. But because Torah and mitzvahs is what the Eibishter wants. And what the Eibishter wants, it can't be otherwise. It's impossible. And that's where they both come together. You understand how even Aveda b'keach atzmi is a bittul betachlis? Traditionally, Aveda b'keach atzmi means that it's based on what I think is good and bad. What they're saying over here, no. There's an Aveda b'keach atzmi to bring myself to the point where I'm only directed by what the Eibishter said. And therefore, stealing, killing, it's whatever the Eibishter says, a minor thing, I'll have Mesiras Nefesh on it. Because my bittul is betachlis. Now, Yeshlahesiv says there, and this is not the ikar for us, not visiting. The me'ein zeh shegam ha-metzias hi bebittul, that even our metzias could be bebittul, himshich gam ba'amakashanim l'shayachim eleh. The Friedrich was mamshich, it also doesn't, like I said, you see it most standing out when it comes to what the shluchim do. Alidei sheishish b'mesiras nefesh gam al inyanim shal pi din. Through this, that the Friedrich Rebbe rooted within them, Mesiras Nefesh, even to have Mesiras Nefesh, even for things that al pi din, tzivid l'mayla, ein mechuyev limser nafshe eleim. He's not obligated to have Mesiras Nefesh. Is a shliach obligated to go on shlichus? There's no chiyuv in Torah for him to go to a place. I was once on there's a question and answer form called Mi Idea. Years ago, I decided to look at it, and I saw a question. And this question, the person was asking sincerely. He was saying, how is it that shluchim go to places where you don't have a minyan, and they daven every day without a minyan? Isn't this compromising Yiddishkeit? So I answered him that
It's compromising their Yiddishkeit, but you're doing the serious nefesh.
No,
you're doing the serious nefesh for the other person.
So hold on. So very on the way, but just a few stops along the way. So I told him first the Rebbe spoke, quoted the six that the Rebbe spoke, that Mekarvim Latera and Not Chas V'Shalom Mekarv Latera to them. The Rebbe demanded that the shluchim should stick, that there's no compromising even Kutzishal Yud of Shulchan Aruch. And I said, second of all, if you look in Shulchan Aruch, you'll see over there that sometimes when a person is not allowed, it doesn't have to daven with a minyan. If a person has to go for business, for parnasa, or for other important things, if it says Beferish Shulchan Aruch, he's allowed to go. If he doesn't have, he can daven by himself. Mikolshkin v'kal v'chemer over here, when he's going to strengthen Yiddishkeit, so he's not weakening his own Shulchan Aruch, but what's left is that the person is giving up a little bit of his Gan Eden. His shleimus as a Yid, that he always davens with the minyan, he's losing that. He's losing that. Why? Because there's another Yid who needs to get matzah for Pesach. And that's a case where you see that the way that Rabbeim put into us in Mesilas Nefesh to do things even that were not required. And even though you see it b'chitzenius the most by shluchim, but this is the entire attitude of how Hasidim live and how every chassid does his aveda. A regular chassid who has a kfiyasitum l'teira, who learns teira, a regular chassid who goes on mivtzayim, a regular chassid who goes to work also in his work and does it the way a Yid is supposed to al pi Shulchan Aruch. The Rabbeim put it into Hasidim, that into Lubavitcher Hasidim, the followers of the Rabbeim, that it should be done in this Eifrim Mesilas Nefesh, just like you see it by the Shluchim. This is an aveda that belongs to every single Yid, that in his, he never gives up on the slightest inyan of Teina Mitzvahs in his own personal life. Even a Balabatish Yid living in a regular place. V'shagam Mesilas Nefesh. V'shagam Mesilas Nefesh. Call me in 3 minutes, okay? Okay. V'shagam Mesilas Nefesh al inyanim elu ti beifin she'in shaykh klal beifin acher. That the Mesilas Nefesh for these things that al pidin is not chayiv to have Mesilas Nefesh. He should do it in a way that it's not shaykh for him to not have Mesilas Nefesh, because it's Mesilas Nefesh mitzad halikus. So we have both. It's his aveda, Mesilas Nefesh mitzad ha'adam, but he does everything in an eifin of Mesilas Nefesh mitzad halikus. Therefore, this inyan that Abakasha also becomes a Havtacha also ends up being mitzad the mekablim, that they also have this inyan. What that means to say with this, I don't know. But ulay yishlema, that it's a al derech inyan of aseret tzeinoi kirit tzein chokis kadesh. No, that can't be. No, cancelled. But we also by the mekablim we have also the inyan of a Havtacha. That since we have the same type of Mesilas Nefesh like the Rabbeim, that they gave it to us, they gave us this Mesilas Nefesh where it's bittul betachlis. So therefore, we also have the aspect that by us, Abakasha is also an inyan of Havtacha.
Because we are being because we're doing the Mesilas Nefesh, the eifin of
complete bittul.
With the complete bittul. So it becomes the Havtacha becomes
the Bakasha becomes an Havtacha, that our Bakasha become an Havtacha.
Yeah, that's what's Havtacha.
Yeah, this is what they're saying. It's a tremendous thing.
The
Tekuyim Havtacha, and may the promise be fulfilled. So just getting back to the current situation, like I said, a promise of a tzaddik, what they ever told us, that now we're in the era of Mashiach already. We're just waiting for the Gilui of Mashiach, the Peil. We're already in the era of Mashiach, and therefore any inyan of Milchama, its relationship to Yidden is only as, you have over here a sign that Mashiach is coming. So certainly the Havtacha of the Tzaddik will be Mekuyim, and is Mekuyim also now in this Mulchama, that the inyan of Mulchama should not apply to inyan that Mulchama usually causes, which is being hurt and worse than being hurt. It will only be an inyan of a siman that Hine Zeh Mashiach, but that Mashiach is here. So the Tekuyim Havtacha Yeshem Elokenu Imanu K'Shem Avosenu Al Yazvenu V'Al Yitzchenu, that the Eibishter should be with us, he shouldn't leave us, and he shouldn't abandon us. And to all the Yidden will be light. Sai Beruchnius and Sai Begashmius. And the Rebbe usually says Begashmius first and then Beruchnius, but over here he's quoting the Lashon of the Frierdiker Rebbe, who usually said Beruchnius first and then Begashmius first. Shkeach, I hope to be able to come in the middle of the summer. Next week, kann ich nicht. Aber in Jerusalem in Akedes Mashiach Tzidkenu, das kennen wir.